traffic camera in rural Ohio caught a dead man buying a bottle of water. Not someone who resembled a dead man. Not a face that required imagination or goodwill to match. 3 people identified him independently, without knowing the others had been asked. His name was Daniel Mercer. He drowned in Lake Erie in 2008. His death certificate was signed and filed. His life insurance paid out. His family buried an empty casket and built their lives around the fact that he was gone. The footage was from February 2019, 11 years after his death. And here is the part that makes this case different from every other presumed death story. The footage was not the most disturbing discovery. What investigators found when they started asking how everyone had been so certain he was dead, that was what changed everything. Because the answer was not an accident. It was not a clerical error. It was not the ordinary failure of an overwhelmed system. It was something that had been running for years before the night he disappeared. Something that had been designed to hold, and something that should have been caught long before a retired clerk sitting at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon accidentally destroyed it with 4 seconds of traffic camera footage. Here is what actually happened. Daniel Mercer was 34 years old and, by every visible measure, unremarkable. He ran a small contracting business outside Cleveland. Residential renovation, occasional commercial work. He had a wife named Karen. 2 daughters aged 7 and 9. A house, a work truck, and he coached his older daughter's soccer team on weekends. Nothing about his life, from the outside, looked like a man who was already 2 years into building a way out. On the night of August 14th, 2008, he told Karen he was going fishing. He did this regularly, sometimes with a neighbor named Pete Colvin, sometimes alone. That night, Pete was not invited. Daniel loaded his gear, said he would be back before midnight, and left. He did not come back. Karen reported him missing the next morning. The search reached the lake by midday. By evening, the Coast Guard had found his boat drifting 2 miles offshore. Motor running at idle. Fishing rod still mounted in its holder. Tackle box open on the seat. His shoes floating 30 feet from the hull. The other shoe was never found. The scene read as a drowning immediately. Water temperature in the low 60s. The area was known for sudden surface chop. No body, but in the deeper sections of Lake Erie, that was consistent with how these cases went. The thermoclines can hold a body submerged for months or longer. The search ran 90 days. The coroner issued a presumption of death at 6 months. The insurance company conducted their standard review and paid out $420,000 to Karen Mercer. Case closed. Daniel Mercer was dead. For 11 years, no part of that conclusion was challenged. Not one element of the scene was revisited. Not one detail in the file was reopened, which meant that everything wrong with the original investigation had been sitting untouched in a county archive for over a decade, waiting for someone to look. Gail Fasano was not a detective. She was a retired county clerk who had developed a habit, in retirement, of browsing publicly available traffic camera captures through the Ohio Department of Transportation database. She had spotted a hit-and-run vehicle that way once. She had called animal control about an injured deer on a shoulder ramp. She described it as just something she did. On February 17, 2019, she pulled up a capture from the previous afternoon. A man in a gray hoodie at a rural gas station, face visible for approximately 4 seconds as he looked up toward the canopy above the pump. She stopped scrolling. She had met Daniel Mercer maybe 3 times, years before his disappearance. Work he had done near her sister's property, but she had a strong memory for faces, and the man in the footage had Daniel Mercer's jaw, his brow, his hairline. She saved a screenshot and called her sister. Her sister agreed. Her sister then called a neighbor who had known Daniel Moore closely. That neighbor said immediately that it looked like him. 3 people, no coordination, no prompting from one to another. All 3, unprompted, said the same name. The chain eventually reached Ron Hadley, a retired county detective who had worked the original missing persons case in 2008. Hadley pulled the old files, pulled the footage, and put them side by side. He was looking for a match or a clean dismissal. What he found was neither. He found something that had been sitting in the original documentation for 11 years, unread, unremarked upon, exactly where someone had left it. The missing persons report from 2008 listed Daniel Mercer's physical description in standard detail. 5'11", 175. Brown hair, brown eyes, a scar on his left forearm from a circular saw accident. In the 2019 footage, the man's left arm was partially visible as he reached toward the pump. No scar. The license listed his eye color as brown. In the footage, the man's eyes read as gray-green. Camera quality and lighting could explain a color shift. But a scar on a forearm either exists or it does not, and the arm in that footage was clean. Hadley flagged both details and started pulling on the rest of the original file. He had no official authority. He was retired, but the case was technically still open as an unresolved death, and he had contacts. What they shared when he went through the original documentation was not one large failure. It was a sequence of small gaps, each individually dismissible, each one that had been dismissed. Lined up together, they stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like a pattern with a purpose. The boat had been found with the motor running. Standard interpretation. Daniel went overboard while it idled, but the fuel tank had been logged as nearly full. A running motor burns fuel. 3 or more hours on the water should have drawn the tank down measurably. A near full reading meant either the motor had not been running for most of that time, or someone had refueled the boat before it was found. The original investigation had not pursued either possibility. The fuel level had been logged and then closed as a data point with no consequence attached to it. Then there was the shoe. The floating shoe had been recorded as a size 11. The missing persons report listed Daniel's shoe size as 10. 1 digit off. Explainable, easy to dismiss. But Hadley was not looking for certainty anymore. He was looking for shape, and the shape of what he was finding pointed in one direction. He pulled the insurance file, and the shape became something impossible to dismiss. The life insurance policy that paid out to Karen had been opened 14 months before Daniel's disappearance. Standard enough. But 8 months before he vanished, the policy had been amended. The original value was $210,000. After the amendment, it was $420,000, doubled. 8 months before he disappeared. The insurance company had reviewed this increase during their post-death investigation and concluded it fell within normal parameters. What their review had not examined was who had actually processed the amendment. The paperwork carried Daniel's signature as required, but the agent who submitted and processed it had left the company after the death claim was paid. A follow-up attempt to reach that agent for interview had received no response. The agent's name was Michael Farrow. Hadley ran it. The employment record existed: address, phone number, social security number. The address was a mail forwarding service. The phone number was a prepaid line, long since inactive. The social security number belonged to a man who had died in 1991. Michael Farrow had never existed. He was a fabricated identity built for a single function. Enter an insurance company's internal processing system, double the payout on one specific policy, and vanish. no other transactions, no other record anywhere in any system. Created, used, and erased. And the only thing this ghost had ever done was ensure that when Daniel Mercer staged his disappearance 8 months later, the money waiting for his family on the other side would be twice as large. This was not a man who panicked and ran. This was not an impulsive decision made under pressure. Someone had constructed a false identity, infiltrated an insurance company's records, and executed a targeted financial amendment, and had done all of it while Daniel Mercer was still living in that house, still driving the work truck, still coaching soccer on weekends. The construction was already running before anyone knew there was a construction to look for, and if Michael Farrow required inside knowledge of how the insurance company's systems worked, which the level of access suggested it did, then Daniel Mercer may not have been working alone. That question was investigated. It was never conclusively answered. State-level investigators were now involved. The white pickup truck from the 2019 footage had Tennessee plates. Those plates traced to a company called Farpoint Residential Services, LLC, incorporated in Nashville in 2011. Property renovation firm. Clean record. Filed taxes. Real employees at a real address in East Nashville. The primary officer of record was named Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole had a Tennessee driver's license issued in 2011. His credit history began in 2010, thin at first, then building steadily, the precise pattern of someone seeding an identity from scratch and doing it with care. He had a mortgage on a property outside Nashville. No criminal record, no prior address history, no family records anywhere, no connection to Ohio, no verifiable existence before 2010 of any kind. According to every official database, Thomas Cole had materialized as a fully functioning adult with no past and no origin. When investigators placed his Tennessee license photo next to Daniel Mercer's 2006 Ohio photo, the differences were real. Different hair, a thinner face. 11 years changes a person's surface. But the underlying structure, the jaw, the brow, the proportions, was consistent enough that a forensic facial comparison analyst concluded the two photographs were highly likely to represent the same individual. Highly likely. Not confirmed. Not enough for an arrest. They needed to find Thomas Cole in person. Instead, they found a house that told them they were already too late. The Farpoint Residential Services office was open when investigators arrived in Nashville. 2 employees were present, described Thomas Cole as a fair employer, said he was currently out on a job site visit. They provided a cell number. It went to voicemail. Generic message, no name. Investigators called back over several days, no response. The property registered in Cole's name had a neighbor who said she had seen him regularly until a few months prior, then not at all. Quiet man, she said. Polite when he came across you, but never the type to seek out contact. She had assumed he was traveling for work, which he did often. She had never seen family visit. She did not know whether he had any. When investigators entered on a warrant, the house was immaculate. Furniture in place, clothing in closets, documents in drawers. Every surface of a lived life, but no photographs on the walls. No letters. No personal correspondence anywhere. The refrigerator had been emptied and cleaned. The rooms had the quality of a space deliberately returned to neutral, not abandoned in a hurry, but closed down with method. He had known they were coming. Or he had built a system that told him when to leave, and it had worked exactly as designed. And then, in a bedroom drawer, they found the photograph. 2 young girls, perhaps 7 and 9 years old, standing in front of a soccer goal. One holding a small participation trophy. No date on the back, no names, no inscription of any kind. When Karen Mercer was shown the photograph, she identified her daughters immediately. She said it had been taken approximately 6 weeks before Daniel disappeared. She had never seen this copy. She did not know one had existed. A man who had spent 11 years systematically erasing himself, who had built false identities, altered his body, rebuilt his financial life from nothing, had carried a photograph of the daughters he abandoned through every move, every alias, every city, and in the last house he vacated before the net closed, he left it in a drawer. Whether he forgot it or left it deliberately, no investigator was ever able to determine. That distinction matters more than it might seem, and it has no answer. They found Thomas Cole 3 weeks later in Knoxville, Tennessee, staying at an extended stay hotel under a third name, one not fully released because it connects to an ongoing related inquiry. He had pulled substantial cash from business accounts in the days before investigators reached his Nashville properties. Either someone warned him, or he had designed the operation so that certain conditions automatically triggered an exit. Which of those is true has not been established. Both are troubling in different ways. When they brought him in, he did not confirm his identity. He asked for an attorney. He was calm, not frightened, not visibly shaken. One investigator described him in the court documents as someone who had rehearsed this moment. Not a man caught off guard. A man who had always known this conversation would come and had long ago decided exactly how he would conduct himself when it did. Formal identification confirmed what the analysis had suggested. Thomas Cole was Daniel Mercer. The physical examination closed the last open question about the 2019 footage. The scar on his left forearm, listed in the original missing persons report, absent from the footage, had been surgically removed. The faint remaining line was consistent with professional scar revision surgery. Done cleanly. Done early. The kind of procedure that requires a consultation, a preoperative assessment, and a deliberate recovery period. He had that surgery before the staged drowning, while he was still Daniel Mercer, while he was still in that house, still driving the work truck, still telling Karen he would be back before midnight. He had started modifying his body to become someone else before that someone else had a name. When the full scope of the construction became visible, the scale of it was difficult to process. The Michael Farrow identity had required a stolen Social Security number from a deceased individual, fabricated employment documentation, and either a precise understanding of how the insurance company's internal systems processed amendments, or direct access from someone inside who had that understanding. Whether Farrow was built alone or with help was investigated and never conclusively resolved. The possibility of an inside collaborator has not been dismissed. The Thomas Cole identity was built using a technique investigators call ghosting, taking the identity of a deceased infant whose Social Security number had never been developed in the credit system, then gradually building financial activity around that number until it passed standard verification. The process requires patience. It requires a clear map of where identity systems look and, more importantly, where they stop looking. The boat scene had been staged with specific attention to investigative optics. A running motor to imply recent operation. An open tackle box to imply active use. A floating shoe to imply physical distress. The location chosen because the deeper sections of Lake Erie reliably hold unrecovered bodies. Every prop placed to direct the first interpretation and make the second interpretation unnecessary. The one detail that broke wrong, the nearly full fuel tank, had been noticed by a recovery officer and logged correctly. It was never followed up. After setting the scene, he drove south. A burner phone active that night and never again placed him moving through southern Ohio and into Kentucky within the first 12 hours. Within 3 days of Karen reporting him missing, he was in a city he had visited once, 2 years earlier, on a job, a city he had quietly assessed as a viable place to begin again. He had prepared every element, anticipated every gap, built every layer to hold under exactly the kind of review it would face. The only thing he did not anticipate was a retired clerk with no investigative authority, no professional obligation, and no reason to be looking, who just happened to be paying attention on a Sunday afternoon and happened to know his face. That was the entire margin. One person, one habit, 4 seconds. The investigation kept her returning to the question of why, and it never found a complete answer. The financial case was documented. The business carried significant debt. Tax deferrals were approaching unavoidable resolution. A commercial renovation lawsuit was moving toward a judgment his own attorney had privately told him he was unlikely to win. The picture was not ruin, but it was a clear trajectory toward sustained difficulty. The kind of difficulty that, once you start calculating your way out of it, leads in a particular direction. The insurance payout addressed Karen's situation. $420,000. The mortgage was cleared. Money was reserved for the daughters. Karen rebuilt a stable life on a foundation that had been engineered by the man who built it to escape her. She had not known. The investigation confirmed this without ambiguity. She had grieved him for 11 years. She had raised 2 daughters alone. She had structured every decision around the assumption that he was dead. The discovery did not simply correct that assumption. It reached back through 11 years of memory and poisoned all of it, every ordinary moment, every decision she had made in good faith, every story she had told her daughters about who their father had been. None of it had been what she thought it was. All of it had been happening while he was alive somewhere, under a different name, running a business with the same skills he had used when he coached their soccer games. But the financial motive still does not explain the photograph. It does not explain why a man who spent over a decade erasing every trace of his previous life carried one image of his daughters through 3 identities, multiple cities, a surgical procedure designed to change his physical appearance, and 11 years of deliberate self-erasure. He kept it through all of it. And in the last house he vacated before the investigation caught up to him, he left it behind in a drawer, instead of destroying it. That is the one moment in this entire case where the construction fails to account for itself, where something underneath shows through. What it means, no verdict addresses. What it cost the people on the other side of it, no conviction measures. The criminal case ended in a federal conviction on insurance fraud and identity fraud. A plea arrangement covered the state charges. The sentence was significant, reduced by plea terms and contested procedural factors at sentencing. He was in his mid-40s by the time he was convicted. The man who had walked out of that house in Ohio in 2008 was already gone regardless of what any court decided. He had spent 11 years making sure of it. The insurance company filed civil suit to recover the full payout with interest and penalties. Karen Mercer's attorneys filed a separate civil action. Both resulted in judgments. The practical recovery of those judgments was complicated by the fact that substantial funds from Farpoint Residential Services had been moved through channels that required ongoing forensic accounting to trace. Some portion may never be recovered. His daughters were 22 and 24 by the time of his arrest. They did not attend the proceedings. They made no public statements. They declined all media contact. What they chose to do with the knowledge that their father had been alive for the entirety of their adolescence, alive, working in the same trade, running a growing business, living in a house with a bedroom drawer. None of that became part of the record. Karen Mercer made one statement through her attorney. She said only that the truth, in whatever form it came, was better than what she had lived with for 11 years, and that she hoped her daughters would find their way through it. She did not say whether she believed that. She did not say what 11 years of misplaced grief had taken from her. She said the measured thing, the survivable thing, and left it there. This is what the whole case comes down to. A man spent a minimum of 2 years building a mechanism for vanishing. He created a ghost identity inside an insurance company's records, doubled his own life insurance payout, staged a drowning on a lake he had studied, had a scar surgically removed from his forearm while still living with his family, drove south with a burner phone on the night he disappeared, and rebuilt an entire life from nothing in a different state. A business, a mortgage, employees, a credit history, a name. He sustained all of it for over a decade. He defeated every official review it faced. The county investigators did not catch him. The Coast Guard did not catch him. The coroner did not catch him. The insurance company's fraud unit did not catch him. No database, no algorithm, no law enforcement initiative caught him. He was caught because Gail Fasano was bored on a Sunday and pulled up traffic camera footage the way she always did because she had met Daniel, Mercer, 3 times over a decade earlier. And because when a man looked up at a gas station canopy for 4 seconds, something in the structure of his face was still, after all of it, exactly his. 4 seconds. That was the margin of 11 years of construction. And he still had that photograph when they found him. That is the detail that does not resolve. He had carried it through everything, through the surgery, through the false names, through the years of building Thomas Cole into someone the system believed was real. He had not destroyed it. He had not left it in Ohio. He had brought it with him into a life built entirely on the premise that those children did not exist for him anymore. And in the last house, in the last city, before he ran for the 3rd time, he left it in a drawer. His daughters grew up without a father because he decided the cost of staying was too high. They grieved him. They built their lives around the loss of him. And the whole time, he had their photograph. He knew exactly who they were becoming. He just chose, every single day for 11 years, not to be their father anyway. That is not a mystery. That is the answer. And it is the part of this story that is hardest to put down.